Hello, and welcome to the next album of the Mural Imagine event. In this album, we're going to be talking about design thinking, filling the gap in your Agile methodology. My name is Ann Steiner, and I'm going to lead this talk for y'all today. Just a little bit about my background before we jump in. I spent about 25 years now working in the software industry, primarily in pure software product companies. I spent 10 years of that as a front-end developer. I always joke with people that I was a front-end developer before it became cool, and then later moved into the ranks of product management, working at nearly all levels of product management, from being a team-level product owner all the way up to leading a product line. And then since then, I've spent the last 5 years working as a leader and a coach, and that all brought me to my current gig, which is as Vice President of Product Agility at Cprime. All right, so I started this by saying that we had a gap in our Agile methodology, but I bet we're probably thinking, whoa, wait a minute, what gap? And when I think of Agile, and you look up the definition of the word, and kind of the perception that jumps into people's heads these days is Agile equals certain iterative methodologies, like Agile equals Scrum or Agile equals Safe or something like that. And so I went straight to the source, the Google Dictionary, and this is what the Google Dictionary told me Agile is. And if you look at definition number 2, it is kind of that perception that we have, a method of project management, especially for software development. But I love that definition number 1 was really it, the ability to move quickly and easily. And before Agile became a thing in the software world, we would have most often used this word to describe athletes or people that are incredibly nimble and flexible. But that's truly what we're seeking as well when we think about how we build our products, whether it's a software product or not. The gold standard these days is how much maneuverability do we have? How much responsiveness do we have? And that's really what we're trying to get from agility. So personally, I'm kind of like on a mission to change our language just a little bit as an organization, from saying Agile, this thing that makes us think about process, to agility, this thing that's really going to help us to unlock a better return on investment, because we're going to have increased responsiveness and that ability to pivot and maneuver. Here's another thing that's different when we start thinking in terms of agility versus just Agile. Is you're actually going to bring 3 pieces together to get that agility. You're going to bring that product thinking, of which design thinking is a portion of that hunk of the circle. We're going to bring the processes and the mindset, that all of this awesome stuff that the Agile world has given us. And we're also going to bring agility into our technology itself. Can our code base, can our environments, can all of the real nuts and bolts of our software products, can they pivot and maneuver too? Because if they can't, then none of this really matters. All right. In short, we really need to ask ourselves the questions: are we building the right thing? Are we building it in the right way? And are we experimenting, learning, and adapting? And most of us probably believe we're building the right thing, but how can we be sure? And that's really where those other 2 bullet points are going to come in. All right, so let's talk about that gap in our Agile methodology that's probably biting us in the butt a little bit. And I'm just going to use cookie cutter Scrum here as the foundation for this conversation. I could lay this picture over any Agile methodology, and my intent here is in no way to poke fun at Scrum, but instead is to show that the process itself doesn't give us enough. One of the things that's always troubled me about Scrum since I was first introduced to it, and at that time I was a very new young product owner, and the thing that troubled me was this picture starts right here with the product backlog. It already exists, but where did that backlog come from? And Scrum never really speaks to that in a good way. So right away we have this gap. This process methodology doesn't tell us anything about product strategy. And it doesn't tell us how to take that strategy and turn it into action from a product design thinking kind of standpoint. Where do those designs come from? How do we get from an idea on the roadmap to those nice little stories that end up in that product backlog? All right, so that's our first gap, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about in this album. Then we can't decide all of that stuff up front. If we decide all of that stuff up front, we're really working with a waterfall requirements design process and just stapling that onto an iterative delivery process. I want to blend discovery, which I'll define as figuring out what we want to build, why we want to build it, and who we want to build it for, with delivery actually building that thing. And we're going to do that with the mechanics of sorting through the backlog, but I want to apply customer-centric design thinking practices to that. I don't want it to just be about authoring epics and stories. And then last but certainly not least, we need to bake in agility into our tech itself. And that's where things like the DevOps movement have come from, and really investing in technical health, automation, all throughout your pipelines and within your code base. When we sync these three things together and these gaps together, it's going to actually give us a connected learning cycle. Scrum gives us a paradigm for delivering a product increment. But when you fill in those gaps, what we're going to have now is not only can we deliver product increments, but we can actually validate them and then ultimately learn from that validation and feed that all the way back through. So those, my friends, are some gaps in our methodology. All right, so how do we address those gaps, though? I want to start with that upfront product discovery, and I also want to talk about that blended discovery and delivery. When I was a product owner, I remember so often being told, why don't you just go write the stories? And I was taught and encouraged to just write the stories, which meant that I would define my stories in my backlog from the tech stack up, not from the customer problem down. This led to a lot of really bad definition and a complete lack of product understanding. I remember hearing things like this from leaders. I need 3 sprints of backlog by Thursday. It was usually Wednesday when we got this one. Or just break the epics into features. PI planning's next week. We got to have those features. Why aren't the wireframes done yet? What is taking UX so long? And just shut up and write the stories. Stop asking questions. I was really bad about asking questions. But so often the thing that was missing was just taking a little time. And this doesn't have to be months or weeks. This can be hours or maybe even days at most, to have a product discovery discussion that's going to bring in some design thinking concepts. Here you see the output of one that we had in person, and you see story maps that are showing what the experience is that we want to provide to the personas. What are the variations of that? On this far side, you even see some sketches here of what that experience is going to feel like to the user. And we're starting to get to what looks like an epic and some stories under that epic, but it's a path across this experience versus a chunk or a vertical slice of it. Now, design thinking doesn't have to look like Post-its on a piece of paper, though. And a lot of times we say, because we can't be together, that we can't do these things. But that's bogus. And you take a tool like Mural, and it just really unlocks the power of having these conversations in a virtual setting. So that exact template that you saw in Post-its, you see here in Mural. And this is an example of a group that I worked with a few weeks ago and what they worked through. They started with the collaborative frame, which is analogous to a lightweight business case. Then they explored the design targets, or who are we trying to impact by this, with tools like pragmatic personas and day in the life. Then we started to sketch out what experience do we want to provide to those people to help them solve their problems. And we use tools like story mapping or value stream mapping or opportunity mapping. Then we started to seek paths through a portion of that experience. And here you see we've drawn some paths. I like to call those journeys. A journey gives you an independent, testable, valuable thing, a thing that could potentially stand alone and be a candidate for release. And then here you see that this team has ordered those journeys, and even, it's kind of hard to see on the slide, but even drawn an MVP line where they would have an initial release and then could iteratively release afterwards. So I want to show you what this looks like in Mural. So the cool thing is we've got a template all set up for you in Mural too that can do this. So if you go to create a new Mural, you just type in product discovery, you're going to see the Cprime product discovery template in here, and you can create a Mural from that. And that's going to give you blanks of all of these different templates that you can use when you're hosting your product discovery workshop with your team. I guarantee it's going to take you through some really awesome conversations, and you'll get all the way from idea to stories, but you'll do it in a manner where you have a common understanding of what you're building, why you're building it, and who you're building it for. Once we get to that, then we can start to blend the discovery and delivery cadence as we go sprint by sprint. Again, we don't want to do all of that definition of the design and everything up front, or we'll be less likely to learn and to pivot. So we've started with some sort of initial backlog and roadmap, which we got from that discovery session. But now, when it comes to sussing out the details of those epics and journeys, we're going to work them in priority order. So if this picture represents the activities of one team during a standard sprint, you're going to actually see that there's two cadences of activities. There's a discovery cadence. That's where we seek to understand more work, who, what, why. And there's a delivery cadence where we seek to actually do the building, testing, deploying of the product. Sprint by sprint, discovery will feed delivery, and delivery in turn will lead us to getting done stuff. And once we have some form of done stuff, then we can validate it and we can learn, and that's going to feed back into the backlog, back into the system. And you know what? You don't have to deploy to production to learn. You might put it in front of stakeholders. You might put it in front of users. You might work it with a controlled beta group or something like that. So don't hear me necessarily to say that you have to go to production to get that learning. You very much don't. So in the end, what this really brings us to is, hey, process is important. And those agile methodologies, they've done so much to help to move us forward as an industry, but process alone won't get you where you're going. You need to bring that product thinking and those design thinking practices into the cadence that the methodology forms. That will allow us then to have product discovery feed product delivery. Product delivery then is going to feed learning. And another thing to think about is we don't want that discovery to fall too far away from that delivery. And what I mean by that is, hey, I don't want you to define like 6 months of work and doing all the discovery on that at the deepest, lowest levels. We might at a high level, but at the deepest, lowest level, like writing stories for six months of work. Because that means when we learn, we're going to be kind of emotionally attached to those stories. We're not going to want to change it. So we want discovery to keep pace with delivery. Maybe you're just a sprint ahead, or 1 to 3 sprints ahead is where we're getting into those details. It's going to give you 2 things. First, you're going to be open to changing. And second, you're going to have less waste too. I mean, those of you who are listening who are product owners and designers, I mean, just think for a minute of how much time you have spent in definition of stuff that never got built. And our iterative methodologies did a really good job of kind of making sure we protected developer tester time to always be working on the most important things. But it didn't do the best time of doing that for us as product owners and designers. If we blend discovery with delivery the way we've talked about in this album, you're going to get more of that, and there's going to be less waste for you. So in the end, this is going to allow us to really take on a culture of experimentation. We can build just enough of something and validate. That's going to lead to learning. That learning then is going to cause us to shift directions. We won't be right all of the time. In fact, we won't be right most of the time. But if we learn which way to kind of steer the bus, that's really what it's all about. Once we adapt and adjust, we're going to start getting good at it. We do it the first couple times, it'll be hard, but then we're going to get better and better and better, and we're steering closer and closer. That's giving us that maneuverability. Then, even if it isn't just about us learning, it might be a market condition, something suddenly disrupts your area. Now you still have that ability to maneuver. And in the end, that maneuverability, that's what Agile equals. And that's the point of all of this. So friends, thank you. I hope this album has helped you to further understand some of the gaps that exist in our Agile methodologies and how we can fill them with things like design thinking and blended product discovery and delivery. If you want to learn more about how we do design thinking in Mural, check out the Cprime workshop, which is also going to be a part of the Mural Imagine event. Here you see my contact information. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to drop me an email or check us out at www.cprime.com. Thank you all.